Santa Fe Art Institute welcomes you back to the Tilt Podcast. Like a lot of people who are not originally from New Mexico, upon moving to Santa Fe in 2016, I quickly came to realize the importance to our community of openly acknowledging the Native and Indigenous communities who have existed here for thousands of years, indeed having made their home here since time immemorial. Those of us who are not originally from New Mexico, when we realize how important it is for our community to have this acknowledgement and to openly celebrate the rich cultural heritage that exists here, but then also acknowledge the history of genocide, slavery, conquest, resistance, reconquest, and then of course the artistic and cultural heritage, we often have to question, now that we are here, what is our responsibility? In this two-part episode, the hosts, together with local artists and creative practitioners, contemplate what are the responsibilities of people originally from outside New Mexico to this place? How do we respectfully connect to and care for the land and the peoples who have made their home here for generations? And how do other racial and ethnic groups not included in the mythical tricultural narrative of New Mexico foster a sense of belonging and rootedness here? Tony Nutsapun and I are pleased to present to you Episode 8, Part 1, Putting Down Roots.
Hey everyone, Tony here.
And this is Courtney.
Glad to be back, everyone. Welcome back, listeners, to episode 8. As we were thinking about this current episode, we reverted back to the previous episode, and we wanted to deepen what Sachi had brought up, who's the executive director of the New Mexico Asian Family Center. I had asked her what are her current or forthcoming project that they are undertaking that is exciting, and one of which is a project called True New Mexico, which it's an initiative that gives voice to young artists and also provides space for them to respond on what home means and how to cultivate that sense of belonging. So, and she also brought up the notion of the New Mexico tricultural myth, which is about New Mexico being made out of three cultures: Indigenous, Latinx, and white Anglo. So let's have a listen on her reflection.
The tricultural myth is this idea that is kind of shared around New Mexico, that the state is made up of only three races, that it's made up of Native, Indigenous, Hispanic or Latino, Latinx, and white or Anglo communities. And it really excludes both the Black and the Asian populations. Even though they are much smaller in comparison, we obviously exist and we're here and we want to be seen, and we are part of the fabric of this state and the culture of this state. A lot of people celebrate the diversity, quote unquote diversity, by only mentioning those three groups. And it also, not only does it invisibilize both the Black and Asian community, it also minimizes the experience of the Indigenous and Latinx communities, because it doesn't actually acknowledge the historical trauma and discrimination that has existed.
It was really interesting hearing Sachi's words, kind of characterizing this tricultural myth and what it really means for the reality of the different communities here in New Mexico. And let's hear a little bit more from Sachi as she talks about some of the repercussions of perpetuating this myth that is present here in New Mexico. Let's hear from her one more time.
It is just so important for people to feel like they're home here. And I think that was something I never realized. Like, this is my home and I was raised here and this is where I grew up. But I always thought it wasn't, because my parents aren't from here. And I just felt like that was something I knew growing up, that I wasn't from here. And that was kind of something I just internalized. And I think it wasn't a bad thing. It wasn't anything I really thought about, but it was something I really believed. And I think it's just so important for people to feel like this is their home as well.
Hearing from Sachi, something that really resonates with me is how complicated this perpetuating this myth becomes for people who also are not born here, right? And something that we've been thinking about ourselves, as hosts of the show, is how all three of us, are not born here in New Mexico. We're all from different places, for whatever that means for us, like being from a different place, whether it means being born in a different place or, kind of feeling like we have our roots in a different place or a place that might not be as represented here in New Mexico among the population. I am from Illinois. I was born in Chicago. I did most of my schooling in Springfield, Illinois. And then I, went to college in Missouri and lived in Georgia and other places around the country. And my sense of rootedness is kind of multi-layered in that way. I feel like I have roots in Illinois. I feel like I still know a lot of people in the Midwest that I grew up with and went to school with, but then I've got these kind of small communities of family and friends and coworkers scattered across different regions of the country. So, surely for other folks who are moving to New Mexico from another place and learning about the significance of place and roots and descent here in New Mexico, maybe more significant than other places we've lived. It's not that much of a huge conversation that I can remember in Illinois, for instance, or in Georgia, for instance. But living in New Mexico, this sense of where are you from? Where did you come from? How many generations have you been here? I've met a lot of white people in Santa Fe who've been in Santa Fe for 30 years. And that sounds like a long time to me. But it's not a long time considering generations of family and ancestry and lines of descent here in New Mexico. So I wonder, Tony, and that's upon what that means to you all as well.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, it's complicated. Even as I think Sachi shares that a woman, born here in New Mexico whose cultural and ethnic background doesn't fit into this epic kind of tricultural myth, still has the sense of, wait, is this my home? And do I really belong here? Am I a part of this place? And, a lot of the deep and important work that she's done subsequently since coming back to New Mexico through her role in the Asian Family Center, and finding how are you carving out space for expanding this narrative, right? For including more backgrounds and in particular Asian folks and Black folks. And me as a white identifying individual who also comes from the Midwest, like you, Courtney, I've been living in the desert Southwest for half my life now, and I have an affinity to this land. To me, it's just always felt more myself, my spirit has always felt more at home here because I have just had a deep connection to the more than human world, the landscape itself, the plants, the animals, the water, the soil. And I spend a lot of time getting to know, the ecologies of place and like, what is a reciprocal relationship with that ecology? How can I give back to the land that gives me so much? But really, sometimes struggling with like, how do I do that in a way that isn't appropriative or, doesn't take away from the primacy of the relationship that the Indigenous and in particular Puebloan communities have with this land, with this water, with all the plants and animals, that inhabit this space and the deep relationships that they've cultivated over centuries. That will transcend anything that I could ever develop, right? And so it's kind of navigating the complexities of that sense of belonging that we all desire and we all hope to find here and amongst one another. And so I'm just really interested in finding out more, how people are cultivating the sense of rootedness for themselves and for broader communities that aren't necessarily, part of this sort of tricultural myth, and ways in which we can expand that myth into a new narrative together.
Oh my gosh, unpacking this home and belonging is a complex web for me. Since moving to New Mexico, I always envy communities who have been here for multiple generations. I'm the complete opposite in a way. You know, even though my name is Thai, but I'm part of the Jeju diaspora, and I never realized that or accepted that until fairly recently, and talking more about that. And that's one thing that interacting with different communities here, who's rooted here, has enabled me to talk more about my own roots that spans multiple generations across multiple countries. So cultivating rootedness, it's for me is first of acceptance of my ancestry, where my ancestors are from, and acknowledging the place and the land that I'm here now. And through rituals, and it is really through rituals of pouring the water through the palms of my hand into the base of a tree. These specific rituals for me is how I connect my ancestral roots to the current place. I don't know about you, Tony, but I can spend hours talking about this. But we're really thrilled and excited to invite artists who shares these complexities and to unpack this a bit more.
Tony touched on something really interesting. So like the process of like learning about our own culture and descent and what really resonates with us individually might be part of the process of establishing a rootedness in a new place. And something that I've learned in Santa Fe, particularly working for SFAI, this privilege of hearing from so many different people particularly when we were having our live events here at the building on site before the pandemic. We had so many great events where people from so many different cultures would come in and talk about their experiences and their life and like how they translated those experiences to their life here in Santa Fe. And that has actually given me, I feel like, some level of education and understanding on just the idea of what it means for rootedness. So like, no, I don't have, let's say, some of the known traditional descent here in Santa Fe and New Mexico, right? I'm not Dene, or I'm not some of the other cultures that have been here for thousands of years. But it makes me want to learn about my own culture that much more, so that I can have something to contribute while I'm here. And then maybe that will create a sense of rootedness for myself and for my family. And maybe that will help others, both folks who aren't from here and those who are from here, who have their line of descent that stayed here, right? Whereas those of us who have a line of descent that came here from somewhere else can have this exchange. Maybe that exchange is important in the process of rootedness, and what it means to like put down roots here.
Yeah, totally. I think that's so important, and a big part of this process. And so much of what we gleaned out of the conversations that you'll hear with Sonia and Naima, that it's a journey to get to know oneself and to perhaps reclaim ancestry that is rooted in another geographic place. And then how do you hold tight to that, but yet create room for, developing new identity that's rooted in the place that you are now, you know, America writ large, or New Mexico, or Santa Fe in particular, you know, and it's something that I think can be enriched by reflecting back on not only where you come from and, you know, your lineage, but yeah, Courtney, exactly like how you might carry that forward in your relationships, whether it's, you know, to the land, to cultivating the land and preparing food and sharing that food with others, or stories, or, you know, other ways to gather, whether it's through dance or song. You know, or what we call artistic practices now, you know, and that sort of self-expression. Like, I think we're always constantly just reaching out, wanting to connect to other folks. And so what are the ways in which we can do that in a thoughtful way by more fully knowing ourselves and having an understanding of what our place is within not only where we come from, but the here and now, and looking forward, you know, like this idea of being a future ancestor, and, you know, sort of the impacts that you will leave behind for generations that you might never know, whether they're your actual kin, you know, through blood or marriage, or, you know, just folks who come after you in some way or another, that this responsibility for care to place and um, people's belonging to that place can move through generations, that, you know, extend beyond oneself, one sense of self.
Yeah, I asked both Naima and Sonia difficult questions. And it centers around rootedness, belonging, and that is how to navigate and balance all that. Because that's something that I struggle with being an immigrant myself. Um, and I mentioned earlier about rituals, and that's how I cultivate rootedness. Rituals of pouring water through the palm of my hand and watching that water touch the base of the tree. That's something that I often do when I was a child in Thailand. And I continue to do that here in New Mexico, in the forest, as a reminder, even though this gesture and this ritual is that took place and birth somewhere else, it carries through to where I am at. And I'd asked Neema, who identify herself as, you know, Muslim Indian American, and Sonia, who is part of the Black Pacific diaspora, these difficult questions. And we hope that this episode unpacks some of that complexity. And, you know, when I was thinking about Sonia, I thought of Naomi Osaka, who's a really well-known tennis player. And I just finished watching a documentary about Naomi, and she talks a lot about the the um, the perspective of Blackness from the American point of view, versus for her, she represented the Japanese flags, being Japanese and Haitian. And she, in that documentary, she unpacks some of that complexity. And I thought of Sonia when I watched that segment, because Sonia unpacks all of that stuff, being, I believe, from her maternal ancestry, from who are from Papua New Guinea, who identify as Black Pacific, but it's a different perspective from the American perspective of Blackness.
Yeah, I think it's super important, you know, to be able to sit with the complicatedness that is identity, and understand that, you know, it's a multi-layered intersectional thing that doesn't just fit neatly into one box under one title. And perhaps it's even fluid over a person's lifetime as they unfold, you know, their understanding of self, as they move from place to place, as they learn more about their ancestry, as they reflect upon their current place. You know, I mean, even just thinking about the tricultural myth, and something that Sachi had said, I mean, it's not as if, Indigenous or Hispanic or even Anglo groups are one, monolithic thing that we can understand. There's so much variation. And I mean, I think it's even false to call them cultures. I mean, really, they're races, perhaps, but that's even complicated, and how do we identify like who belongs to what and why, and even thinking about how within Hispanic culture, historically, there has been colorism and understanding the ways in which that plays into notions of whiteness and how folks identify. Are you a person of color? Do you first identify as Hispanic? Is that the same as Latinx? I mean, and in particular, where are we talking about Mexican or Chicano identity within New Mexico? I mean, there's, so we're saying Hispanic, Anglo, and Indigenous. Where's Chicano? I mean, New Mexico was part of Mexico for a while before the United States purchased it from Mexico, right? And that there's a long history of this intercultural commingling between the Hispanic conquistadors and when they were pushed out during the Pueblo Revolt and went back down to Mexico, and then came back up, and the interrelationships with the indigenous peoples here, right? So it flattens things, this tricultural myth. It denies the complexity of all of our identities. And, we can't assume that any particular identity is homogenous and applies, across the board to any particular group. And so it's really having a detailed understanding of those complexities and how people self-identify and where they position themselves within these larger narratives that, throughout so much of human history deal with migration and movement and commingling of cultures and change and dynamic existence.
Let's have a listen. So in this episode, we're gonna hear from two emerging artists who participate in the True New Mexico initiative, who identify as part Muslim, Indian, and Black Pacific diaspora. So here's Neema and Sonia. We are super happy to have Neema with us here today. She's a current student at the Albuquerque Academy who have recently participated in a couple of initiatives organized by the New Mexico Asian Family Center and the New Mexico Black Leadership Council that centers around conversations on identity and place. So welcome, Neema.
Hi, thank you for having me here.
Neema, for our listeners out there, tell us about how you got involved with these two organizations, the New Mexico Asian Family Center and the New Mexico Black Leadership Council.
Yeah, so I actually got involved with New Mexico Asian Family Center first. Mm-hmm. I had someone in my Muslim community, Ismaili community, actually work for them. She then showed me Tea Talks, which is this monthly talk that the New Mexican Asian Family Center has for gender minorities to just discuss various taboo topics in our communities and in the Asian community. And mm-hmm. that was really interesting. So I followed them through social media on Instagram and such. And I found out that they were hosting this art event for young artists. And actually my friend who went to Albuquerque Academy was the one that was in charge of it, the Future Ancestors one. So nice. I took part of it. Yeah. And then after that, she reached out to anyone who was had taken part in Future Ancestors and asked about True New Mexico. And that's how I learned about the Black leadership community. And I went to that art organization.
You've mentioned Future's Ancestors. What is that? And describe the work that you submitted.
Yeah, so in Future Ancestors, the event was trying to uplift Asian communities, specifically the younger generations, and helping us create artwork that will be able to recognize our cultures, but also showcase how we are different from our Asian ancestors and how living in America has shaped us. Basically, just trying to encapsulate the American Asian Pacific Islander experience. And so the work that I did for that, I actually created a 4-photo series of showcasing various clothing, because I felt that the largest or the most prominent gap between my Asian identity and my American identity was through clothing. So I wanted to showcase, trying to show how I felt internally in an external way through my photographs. So one of the pictures that I did was just a mixture of clothing, me going from like this American style white dress into a traditional Indian outfit of a sari. And that picture, I really just wanted to show how I felt like my two cultures were split and how I felt my identity was basically split, and just trying to show and encapsulate the type of rift I feel inside me. I also added words to my pictures just to, I feel like, strengthen the imagery and just to try to promote more of what like the pictures were trying to show. So for the picture that I've been describing, I talked about just how I don't feel like I belong anywhere, and how being like brown skinned, but also knowing more of these American traditions has really made me feel like unwelcomed in like all the communities and not feel like I'm part of a specific community.
I was deeply moved by Neyma's work. What's even more revealing about the complexity of Neyma's work was the accompanying text with her images. I pulled them up during our Zoom recording and asked her if she's cool with reading them. Here's Neyma again.
The color of my skin and my white dress gives me away. I'm not from here. The design of my blue sari gives me away. I'm not from there. The accent in my voice, the English on my tongue gives me away. I'm not from anywhere. Same bedroom, different lifestyles. I say my evening prayers. I play my American games. I change my Indian clothes to my Western wardrobe. I lie in bed, comfy in my jeans, thankful I don't have to wear another Punjabi tomorrow. I know how to make myself wear a sari, and I'm pretty good if I say so myself. Well, that is until all the aunties start staring. Not to worry, soon an auntie pulls me aside and takes me straight to the bathroom. She fixes it for me and finishes her good deed of the day. It's much easier to just wear a dress. Kulai kachi nati bole. I try to purse my lips to speak. Only English comes out. I try again. My American lifestyle has failed me once again. I can understand, I tell them. I know what you're saying. Why can't I speak? I enjoy Bollywood movies just like any other desi. I already told you, speak Gachi. What did you say? No, I don't need you to repeat it in English. I just didn't hear you. Yes, I understand you. Say it again, please. Tu Indian nai.
Thank you, Neyma. That was beautiful. I have a follow-up questions regarding these texts. What was going through your mind as you were in the process of writing these texts that you shared with us?
Yeah. So as I said before, I took the pictures and I created all the images. And when I was trying to do the final touches on my artwork, I realized that something was missing. And I felt like these images weren't powerful enough and they weren't showing all of my emotions. So I looked at each image and I started thinking about all my experiences as an Asian American. And I just the words just started coming out. And so for each image, I like wrote a little bit. And then after I wrote for all of the images, I started editing each one and trying to figure out like how to display it. And yeah, and I don't know, it just all came out in a blur.
That's so awesome. So for our listeners, please stay tuned and visit the SFAI Tilt podcast webpage. We will feature some of these images that Neema have referenced in addition to the text. So stay tuned. Let's circle back to my first conversation with you and your involvement with New Mexico Asian Family Center and the New Mexico Black Leadership Council. You've mentioned True New Mexico. Tell us more about that. And did you submit any work for that initiative as well?
Yeah. So True New Mexico was another event sponsored by New Mexico Asian Family Center and New Mexico Black Leadership Community. And they were looking for Black and Asian American artists to create work talking about the tricultural myth and just trying to put ourselves in the tricultural myth. So for those who don't know, the tricultural myth is, it believes that like there's only 3 cultures in New Mexico, like the Spanish, Native, and Anglo, and they live separately and in harmony here in New Mexico. So they basically take away from any other minority experience. And what True New Mexico was trying to do was trying to prove how Black and Asian voices are in New Mexico and how we've lived in New Mexico. So for my work, it was supposed to be a self-portrait, and for my work, I wanted to emphasize how I live in the background in New Mexico in this landscape. I was born and raised here, and I just wanted to put more emphasis on that. So for my piece that I submitted for this, I had a background of the Sandia Mountains that I can see straight from outside my house. And I put a self-portrait of myself in this clothing that's more of a skirt and a blouse that has these patterns that seem more of a foreign pattern rather than like something you would buy in a store in the US. And I put the mountain like cutting right through me on that image to prove how fundamental New Mexico was for me. And I titled the piece, "The Mountain Runs Through Me." And so I really just wanted to emphasize how I live in this background, in this scenery, how I live in New Mexico. And around me, I had different images circling, going back to more of that dipolar effect of like my American lifestyle and my Indian lifestyle. So on one side, I had images of me in like American clothing, and on the other side, I had images of me praying in like my Muslim clothing and in Indian clothing and stuff like that.
Yeah, I get it. It's tough, and I can relate to your sentiment. Being part of the Chinese Jeju Chinese diaspora, being born in Thailand, with many generations in Thailand and growing up in the United States. So I can understand what you feel. This question relates to your identity as a Muslim Indian American. How do you navigate all of this? I know you expressed it through your images and your artwork, but in real life, as you're going about day to day, how do you navigate all this?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I feel like for a long time, I felt really lost, and I just felt like I can't relate whenever anyone talked about any suffering that they had or any like whether it be from like their gender, like sexism or racism or anything. I always felt like I couldn't relate to any of those experiences. But in the past few years, I've been reflecting more, and I think what's helped me reflect a lot is I'm part of this speech and debate team in my school, and I've been reading a lot of minority authors and learning more about different experiences, and just also facing my own discrimination in the debate community. as it being a predominantly white space. And I feel like I've learned more and understood more about past experiences that I never really considered as racism or sexism. And I think I've done a lot of deeper reflection on my past experiences and my current experiences, and just learning more about how my identity fits into my own life or into various situations. And I think the way that I navigate it the most is just by reflecting. And I think being able to be part of these communities, whether it be through these literature bases or through art organizations such as like True New Mexico or Future Ancestors, has really helped me find a community and find a place for me to belong, and to find people who understand like what I've been through, but also have their own experiences that we can all just learn from.
Wow. Well, thank you for spending some time with us, Nema, and for sharing your work and your processes for our listeners. We really, really appreciate what you do and your work. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you. Thank you as well. It's been a blessing to be able to share my voice and share more of my art to more people.
Do you have anything to add for our listeners before we part?
Yeah. If you're an artist out there, or even if you're just a minority who's trying to figure out your identity, it always takes time to figure out who you are. I know that's such a cliche, but everything will fall out the way it's supposed to, and at some time you'll just have some sort of realization, and you'll be able to understand everything, and you'll feel accepted. And although I am still struggling with my identity, there will be some sort of peace, and you will be able to find a community who's there for you to support you, and everything will be okay.
Thank you so much. Thank you, truly. Hi, listeners. We, meaning Tony and I, are super duper thrilled to be out on the field to record this special segment of the Tote podcast. Very, very honored to have Sonia Larson here with us. Sonia recently participated in True New Mexico, an initiative jointly organized by the New Mexico Asian Family Center and the New Mexico Black Leadership Council that cultivates a creative space for meaningful dialogue about our complex identities and how we relate to place. Sonia, we are super honored to have you here. Thank you for having us.
Yes, thank you for meeting with me today.
Sonia, I had the honor to listen to a presentation that you gave as part of True New Mexico project. We had where you had identified yourself as part of the Black Pacific diaspora. Can you elaborate more on this?
So for me, I guess it's kind of an identity that I've created for myself that acknowledges both my Pacific roots and my Pacific identity, but also acknowledges the role that I take on as a Black woman in the United States, being away from the island. And it's just become an identity that I've just started to become more comfortable identifying as, and that I feel like suits me and my experience.
The work that you submitted and created for this project surrounds an object, which is a Miri blouse.
Can you talk a little bit more about that work, specifically the materials you use and how they uplift your multiple selves?
Yeah, so a Mary blouse is a traditional PNG blouse that's worn mostly by women throughout the islands. It was introduced in the 1800s when uh, the missionaries started coming in, and it became kind of a staple piece for women's clothing. Because before that, it's the islands, and our people used to just, be naked, but that was deemed as unacceptable. And so this new piece of clothing was introduced and it stuck around. And it's one of the staple pieces of like Papua New Guinean women's fashion. And so I chose to create that blouse because I feel like that represents the Pacific identity and also like the complexities behind the Mary blouse as well and its relationship to colonization, but also how it's become something that's uniquely New Guinean. And so to create it, I just used cotton fabric. It's a white cotton fabric, and I chose white because the images that I ironed on,
Mm-hmm.
I felt like it would pop better, it would make the images stand out. And so I used that white colored fabric, and then from there, yeah, I ironed on images of, indigenous power, yeah, indigenous movements and Black Power movements throughout the world, and ironed those on, and then I hand sewed the shells and the beads onto the blouse after I finished with the images and everything.
You brought
Yeah.
the blouse with you. Let's have a look.
Did.
It's right behind you as you talk about it. So just for our listeners, Sonia brought the actual object of the blouse itself. Yeah. Why these images?
Well, we were asked to, yeah, create an art piece that touched on one of the main topics we focused on in class. And then one of the topics we did touch on was Black Lives Matter in the Pacific and what that looks like in the Pacific. And I knew as soon as I saw that on um, the syllabus that that's what I wanted my project to be about, and
Mm-hmm.
that's what I wanted to make an art piece about. And I just had this idea kind of on the spot. I was like, okay, I know I want to do something with Black Lives Matter. I know I want to do something Pacific. I know I'm really passionate about this. Um, but like, what could I do? And I started thinking of all the things I could do. And I was like, I'm going to make a Mary blouse and I'm going to put images on it. And I have this whole thing planned. And so I created it for that class. But the images, um, I kind of started out just by thinking of movements and also just looking at pictures, remembering pictures that I saw like on social media or, yeah, just like in the news and things that I felt like impacted me and had a big impact on me and wanted to put those onto the blouse. And so I did create this blouse in 2019 and I am during July. So still there was that resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement after the death of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so I knew I wanted to incorporate them on the blouse and their stories on the blouse. And I also included images of Ahmaud Arbery. Um, I think, I'm not sure if Tamir Rice is on
Mm-hmm.
here. Um, and yeah, just, people who have fallen victim to police brutality. Um, and then I also incorporated images from Australia's protests.
Mm-hmm.
They had a Black Lives Matter protest there as well. Um, and they also have a protest, I guess, which kind of covers the Black Lives Matter too in Australia for the Aboriginal people there.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so they were also a part of that. Lots of rallies against the Australian government for the way they treat indigenous folks there and incorporating images from the Free West Papua movement. Because right now West Papua is under Indonesian rule. So right now they are under Indonesian occupation, and they illegally occupied West Papua after they were freed from Germany, and there has been race-based violence that has just grown throughout the years since early 1900s. And so the Free West Papua movement has kind of kicked off, I think, more, and I learned way more about it at UH, and actually was brought to my attention there by professors. And it just became something that I was really passionate about because they're our neighbors, they're PNG's neighbors, and we look the same and we've lived on the same lands. And just to see the way that the Indonesian government has been treating the indigenous people has been really just aggravating and like heartbreaking. And they are definitely, to me, a part of the Black Lives Matter movement. And I feel like the Black Lives Matter movement isn't just something that goes on in the Western world, or it isn't something that just the United States focuses on. It's a worldwide issue. It's everywhere. And then Black Lives Matter is an indigenous movement as well, because indigenous people come in all different shades and are mostly, black. We all come from blackness somewhere. So, yeah. And then the Polynesian Panthers, I thought, was a super cool movement. They were inspired by the Black Panthers here in the U.S. and started their chapters in mostly like New Zealand and Samoa. And it was just, a movement similar to the Black Panthers, just fighting for Pacific rights and indigenous rights, but taking inspiration from the Black Panthers. And so I thought that was super interesting to learn about as well. And just seeing the just like the similarities in the movements, and seeing people recognize and see themselves in other people across the globe.
Thank you for sharing your process and your thinking, Sonia. Tell me more about the beads.
So for the beadwork, I do have red, white, yellow, and black beads, which are CPIC flag colors, and that is the province which my mother comes from. And so I wanted to incorporate that just for my own personal history. Also, the cowrie shells that I sewed on the blouse are from Papua New Guinea, and they're from my grandmother's island in Kavieng, and my mom brought them back, and so I knew I wanted to put those on just to relate it back to, my personal identity as well. But I was inspired to use beads by another Papuan artist. Her name is Lisa Hilly. A lot of her work, she did an exhibition called Trade and Transformation, which had a lot of beadwork and used a lot of traditional money, and told like the story. She's from New Britain, which is another island that was colonized by Germany at first, and then the UK.
Mm.
And so, with the beads for her exhibition, the Trade and Transformation, she used those to represent the currency. So, when they started opening up coconut plantations in New Britain, um, the mostly, indigenous people would work there. Indigenous Papua New Guineans would work, and they would get paid a thimble full of beads for every pound of coconut that they had. And so she was using that in her piece to represent, the currency and, trade and transformation. And I was like, I didn't know anything about that history. I feel like, for me, I've been very disconnected from my Pacific roots. And so being able to learn about that and kind of see the way that she acknowledged the history behind the beads, but using it as like, now they take on this whole new thing because Pacific beadwork and all these great things came out of it, but the beads themselves are not indigenous. But yeah, like how we've used them and made them our own. And I was super inspired by her work and just what she does as a Black Pacific woman as well. And I wanted to like honor that history of New Britain and then also pay respects to her as an artist.
Do you see this Mary blouse a self-portrait of you?
I feel like, yeah, I honestly do. I think that when I was making it, I was kind of just thinking about all the complexities of my own identity and just of Black and Indigenous identities in general. And it's been really hard for me to navigate that and try to figure it out for myself. And so I felt like making this blouse for me was super like therapeutic and like just kind of opened a lot of doors for me. Like just by being able to see like a visual representation of like who I think I am and like who people say I am and just like everything, and just has helped me become more confident in my identity. And then just the opportunities that I've had from creating this Mary Blouse alone, just sharing it in class and then having my work sent to other artists like Lisa Hilly. My professor actually sent her um, pictures of my work and my project, and then having Lisa Hilly come and reach out to me and tell me that like my work like inspired her
Oh.
was like probably like the best thing that's like ever happened to me.
Oh.
And it was just crazy to think that like I, who like didn't feel like, oh, I have like any sense of identity, I don't really belong anywhere, I don't really know what I'm doing, to then like inspiring other people and then other people wanting to reach out to me and see my work and all these amazing opportunities just that have come from just the creation of this blouse. And just this is probably the first time I like created a piece that was like super vulnerable, that made me feel super vulnerable. And then all of the things that have followed because of that, it's been super, yeah, it's just been amazing and very like humbling and yeah, just a great experience and all these new things opening up. It's just crazy.
And from the images that you shared with us, you also wore the blouse. Why?
um, I think, but initially, I did. I didn't make it with the intention of wearing it ever. I kind of just made it to be, just like a wall piece. Um, But I was talking to one of my friends, and they were like, "You should wear it. You should put it on." And I was like, "Okay." I was like, I don't know if it's gonna fit. There's like not a zipper. I feel like I made it too tight. Like I don't know." Um, and then she's like, "Yeah, I think you should wear it. I think that if you wear it, um, it it could be super powerful." And I was like, "I think you're right. I think you're right." So then I put it on, and then took pictures for the True New Mexico campaign, kind of to be like a new way, I guess, of like presenting my piece instead of just having it on its own. Um, and yeah, so,
How did you feel when you had the Mary blouse on you? What was going through your mind at that
um,
time?
I think at first, um, I was like super like uncomfortable, not necessarily because of like the way it fit or anything, but I was just embarrassed of like being seen like with it on.
Mm.
um i I think that's still just like my insecurities about things that I like struggle with. um but so initially when I put it on, I felt like super like uncomfortable about like, oh, what if somebody like sees me in this and like ask me like questions or something, like, "Oh, I just want to like take pictures and go." But um having it on, I guess it felt like, and then taking the pictures for the True New Mexico campaign, I think it just brought like a new light, I guess, or a new way of looking at the piece that I've already made. um and it kind of made me feel like more, I felt, I guess, more powerful as like I kept it on. I was like, I made this and I'm wearing it, and it's so different to see it on like an actual person, and then for it to be on me, like this piece that I already created, kind of both subconsciously and consciously as a reflection of like my own identity,
Mm.
to have it be placed on me, uh that felt really, it felt kind of good, and it felt like something that I was like proud of doing. And then those like insecurities and feelings that I was like, oh, I don't want anybody to see me if with this on, like it's not even that like sewn right. All this stuff kind of just like went away.
You know, from the picture um, that you shared with us, where did you take those pictures, those images?
So I took them on the side of my aunt's house, and then I also took some when I was up in Santa Fe. Um, I went up there with my friend to go just take pictures of the blouses up there, trying to capture, um, I guess, like a different view of the blouse. I was like, I kind of want to take a picture of it, like in the desert, up there, to show, I guess, like the difference of like being a Pacific person, um, away from water.
Mm.
Um, and so I took some up there as well, and yeah, around the plaza area, and then up. I really don't know Santa Fe too well, but like up kind of by one of the hiking trails.
I'm gonna shift gears a little bit. You hinted about navigating identity. How do you navigate being an indigenous person living on another indigenous land?
I feel like it's a very complex thing, because I feel like no matter where I am, I'm always going to be on a land that's not my own, and it's always and it's been kind of hard as you know an indigenous person who is so disconnected from their own land to be on another indigenous person's land. It kind of feels, it kind of makes you feel guilty in a way. Um, and it's just, yeah, been a, it's been a journey. Um, it's been hard to kind of try to figure that out. And then also as well, like I feel like just as people of color, we're just more aware, have a more, yeah, we're more aware of privilege and what that looks like. And I feel like for me personally, I'm always constantly checking that privilege and, trying to, yeah, just keep checking that privilege and then acknowledging the privileges that I do have and don't have within my own community and within the community I'm in. And figuring that out, I try my best to, always pay respect to the land that I'm on and the indigenous people of those lands, both here in New Mexico and in Hawaii. Because, yeah, neither one of these lands are mine. I have no connection to it. And so it's been interesting. And then also that super strong disconnect of being an indigenous woman of the Pacific, a person whose identity and, just being is so connected to water and the ocean, to live in a desert where there's absolutely no ocean or water has been very hard. It kind of feels like you lose a piece of yourself when you're not on the land that you're supposed to be on.
What would you say are the threads that ties it all together? And the reason why I ask this question is I am part of the Diju diaspora. My great grandfather moved from the northeastern coast of Guangdong province, and they're part of the Teju people, to Thailand. And I was born in Thailand. I'm fourth generation Thai Chinese. However, I left Thailand at a very young age, where I myself is constantly I myself is constantly confronted with amnesia of forgetting. And my underlying thread that ties it all together is really food. I never did understood why why we eat certain food, even when we were in Thailand or when we was growing up here in the United States. A certain food that ties it back to my Teochew roots. So that is the reason why I had asked that question.
I think for me, it would probably be dance. Just everything. Yeah, just having that motion, I guess.
Hmm.
I also created like another art piece that like talked about how Pacific communities can connect through dance.
Mm.
And I feel like for me, I represented that in terms of the water as well, just being able to move like freely. And so I think whenever I dance or listen to, Pacific music is when I feel like that I'm returning back to who I am. And it just reminds me of, just moving like the water and then feeling connected not only to like myself or, Papua New Guinean people or Melanesian people, just like our Pacific community as a whole. And I think dance is really powerful in that way.
Thank you. I have one last question. You're currently studying at the University of Hawaii, and how has this experience so far informed you about the spaces between longing and belonging?
I think even the short time that I've been at UH, it's been the most life-changing experience I've ever had. It's been super informative. I've learned so much about the Pacific and all the issues going on in Pacific communities. And then I've also learned so much about myself. I feel like if I didn't go to UH, I would have never made a piece like this. Because I wouldn't have been able to understand the way that I was feeling or meet other people who felt the same way. And one of the people who had the biggest influence on me since going to UH was my professor, Joy Enomoto. She is half Black and half Hawaiian. And just talking to her, I feel like I was I could see myself and seeing her be successful and then just so knowledgeable. It was just super inspiring because growing up in New Mexico, there isn't very many Pacific people. There aren't very many Black people. So it's hard to find people to connect with like that. And so going to UH, and being able to find those connections and then actually have somebody understand how I'm feeling has just been so important and just so amazing. And it was something I never thought that I would be able to have. And so going to UH has really just changed my life for the better. And I'm super grateful that I had the opportunity to study there and, to live on campus, even if it was for a semester, and just make those connections. So I feel like everything that I've done at UH has just, made me grow in so many different ways, and I'm really thankful for that opportunity.
Thank you so much, Sonia. Wow. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you to all of our listeners out there and to today's guests, Nima Farali and Sonia Larson. Don't forget to check out the show notes for more information about the True New Mexico Asian Family Center, and the New Mexico Black Leadership Council. You can subscribe to Tilt on Podbean. New episodes drop on the fourth Friday of every month. Part 2 of episode 8 will be out on August 27th. To find out more about SFAI and stay informed about our upcoming programming, visit sfai.org and sign up for a monthly newsletter. And on our support page, you can find some great SFAI merch, including t-shirts, water bottles, limited edition artwork, and more. You can also learn about our Pivot membership or make a quick and easy tax-deductible donation of any amount. 73 cents of every dollar you contribute goes to support socially engaged, underrepresented, and marginalized artists and creative practitioners from across the globe. Check out our incredible 2021 labor residents on our website. And as always, you can follow us on Facebook and Instagram Just search us at Santa Fe Art Institute.